Welcome to our first video. Let us introduce ourselves. We are students from Petra Christian University International Business Management Program. My name is Ian Francis, this is Owen Sentana, Dede Setyawan, William Subandi, and Dante Tjahjono. For today's video, we're going to talk about what are de-globalization and regionalization, as well as the impact toward firms. We hope you enjoy this video.
As a social being, it is impossible for us to survive by ourselves. Neither is a nation. Differences in the starting point, such as natural resources, force us to rely on each other. With the help of technological improvement, the idea of globalization appeared.
Globalization is a process of integration, interaction, interdependence among people, companies, and governments of different countries, driven by international trade and investment, aided by information technology. After its implementation, many parties have tasted its benefits, especially businesses such as cheaper resources, exchange of technologies, know-how, and better practices, market expansion, especially if local market is already saturated, and foreign direct investment for business expansion.
Despite the benefits of globalization we mentioned earlier, there were several world events such as trade war, COVID-19, which reshaped the pattern of globalizations. We are talking about deglobalization, which we are experiencing right now, and possibly regionalization.
However, little do we know what exactly deglobalization and regionalization are, the causes, the impact for businesses, and whether those phenomena will last. Without knowing those, businesses cannot react or adapt. Thus, let us talk about those things. De-globalization is the contrary of globalization. It's the process of diminishing interdependence, integration, and interaction among people, companies, and governments across the world. This means that there will be no more international trade, investments, and any other forms of influence outside of the country. Each country needs to be self-sufficient, producing by themselves and selling it to the local market. This condition does not benefit anyone. The real question we should ask is, what causes this event?
Deglobalization happens in the midst of economic uncertainty, diminishing trust among nations, economic crisis, and many other factors, either internal and external, that impact international relationship negatively. It has occurred long time ago. Take example of 2007 where the financial crisis happened, which reduced the demand for goods and services from other countries, destroyed confidence, and many more. These years, the idea of deglobalization appeared again. It all started in 2017 when Brexit happened. UK planned to leave EU, which means the trade ties with EU members are weakened. In 2018, trade war between US and China occurred, which caused major disruption in international trade due to tariff imposition. Moving to the end of 2019 until now, a deadly virus called COVID-19 appeared, which forced almost all nations to do lockdown policies, making globalization activities very restricted. The question is, how does deglobalization really affect firms?
Now we are going to discuss the impact of deglobalization to firms that engage in international markets and that do not. For international firms, there are 4 impacts. First, your supply chain from or to other countries is really disrupted. With the imposed tariffs from China and the US, your supplies become more expensive. Furthermore, as many countries apply lockdown, supply chains become non-existent. Second, business activities are stopped due to lockdown policy. Third, if all nations apply deglobalization, it means international firms cannot expand their market to other countries. They are forced to do business in the origin country. Lastly, demand decreasing significantly for majority of businesses. Then what about local focused firms? There are 2 impacts here. First, increased pressure from international firms in terms of local supplies and market. And lastly, supply movement, market demand, and business activities are disrupted. Looking at those impacts, What should they do in order to survive this deglobalization?
Now, let us talk about solution for firms, and it can be local and international one. Let us start with international one. What can they do? So there are 4 solutions that they can do. The first one, they can evaluate and diversify supply chains, finding secondary or more supplies, and in this kind of condition, we highly suggest that they find local suppliers. Second, they can invest in technology and infrastructure to support remote work and virtual collaboration capabilities. Third, they can establish crisis management team to adapt policies or practices with the event of crisis. Lastly, they can use scenario analysis. For this scenario analysis, they need to prepare 2 scenarios. The first one, if lockdown being applied, and the second scenario, if the firms are allowed to produce. Let us discuss about the first one. If lockdown being applied, they can work online, they can analyze remaining supplies and market demand, and they can analyze which part of business activities costs can be reduced. According to research by Kalb and Becker, there are 15 ways chosen by the manufacturing companies to cut their costs. However, there are 4 top options chosen by them, which are reducing the overtime, furlough measures, discretionary spend cuts, and an increase of home office quota. And the second scenario, if the firms are allowed to produce, they can demand analysis, they can adjust supplies to the demand, and they need to abide to the strict health procedures.
Solution for firm deglobalization. So for local firms, there are 3 suggestions. First one, applying digitalization in most part of the business processes to minimize costs, becoming more efficient and more effective. Engage better with customers and reduce the transmission of COVID-19. Second solution, establish crisis management team to adapt policies to practices with event of crisis. The third solution, the last one, searching for new opportunities, becoming suppliers of bigger firms. From this table, we can see that there are 7 emerging technologies, which are process automation, artificial intelligence or AI, smart analytics, hybrid or multi-cloud, blockchain, edge computing, and 5G. So for process automation, AI and hybrid or multi-cloud is actually to cost reduction. And for smart analytics is to improve decision making, and for the blockchain is to improve their foundation and infrastructure. For edge computing is to improve brand value, and for 5G is very essential for future survival and for improving decision making. From these 7, 5 is very essential, which are process automation, AI, smart analytics, hybrid or multi-cloud, and 5G. To sum up, we need to invest in these 5 particular emerging technologies.
Will deglobalization last? According to Kenneth Rogoff, professor of economics and public policy at Harvard University, deglobalization will only last as a short trend, as it will only give negative impacts to all related parties. Nevertheless, globalization cannot go back to its usual form that fast. First, several studies have been conducted to know what would be the new form of globalization. This new form is now known as regionalization. According to Eric Kakovich from Kellogg Institute, regionalization can be defined as the integration and interaction of countries within a region in social and economics. The example of this are European Union and Association of Southeast Asian Nations. What is special about regionalization are the differences between nations in its society and economies are not as complex as globalization, and most of these nations have the same history and situation. Thus, what can firms take from regionalization?
There are at least 3 impacts of regionalization on firms. First, option for cheaper resources are open. Second, market expansion. Even though not as big as globalization, but still better than deglobalization. Last but not least, transfer of technology, know-how, and better practices. Even though indeed we are still in the deglobalization phase, there are signs that COVID-19 can be handled, which mean international economic activities can happen again sooner.
In order to be one step ahead of their adversaries, it is better to anticipate regionalization. Now, how can firms maximize this? First, you need to analyze the potential resources, technologies, practices of other nations in the region which you can benefit of. Then decide whether it is worth it to acquire those by using cost-benefit analysis. Second, if local market is saturated, analyze which nations you can serve, whether your products or services can solve their problems, whether it suits their culture, etc. The next thing will be conducting business feasibility analysis. Is it possible to conduct business there? There are 4 components. The first component is economic feasibility, whether economically feasible to do, whether you have enough funds, whether your income level or can surpass your costs, and many more. Second is technical feasibility, whether you have the resources and capabilities to conduct it, such as human resources, technology, etc. Third is operational feasibility, whether the established business activities can operate well and the maintenance is not complicated. And lastly, schedule feasibility, whether the schedule is reasonable.
After all, we can conclude that deglobalization happens because there are global events, such as COVID-19 and trade war, which create economic uncertainty, disrupt supply chains, and product demand for businesses. As of right now, there are several actions all business players can take. Applying technology to improve efficiency, creating crisis management teams, diversifying suppliers or local, or even becoming suppliers for local businesses, and lastly, creating scenario analysis.
Deglobalization will not last long, as it would only bring harm to all parties. But we cannot immediately go back to usual globalizations due to an ongoing trade wars. Thus, we can anticipate a new form of globalizations, which is regionalizations. Regionalization will give more supplies and market expansion options for businesses, allow technological and know-how exchange. However, they need to first analyze whether it is better as well as feasible to buy supplies from and expand to other countries within a region.
Thank you for watching our first video. Feel free to leave comments or questions down below for further details. If you like the content, please leave a like and subscribe for more contents in the future. Once again, thank you and see you again in our next video.